مساء الخير. Good evening. My name is Rasha Helwi. I was born in the city of Akka, one of the oldest cities in the world. It's located on the Mediterranean coast, north of Haifa, Haifa north of Jaffa, Jaffa north of Gaza. The old city of Akka, surrounded by the sea and walls from three sides. My father, George Sliman Helwi, was born in 1957 in Hayy al-Fakhura, the pottery factory neighborhood, which is located on the west-south side of the city. I was born in 1984. When I was 10 years old, my parents bought a house in Al-Gharbi neighborhood, the west side of the city. It's located exactly near one of Akka's oldest gates. It was the closest to where my father left his heart, in his childhood neighborhood. Because my father, like all people from Akka, or how we call them Al-Akkawiyi, when they cross the city walls, they swear in the name of their ghurba. وحياة غربتي, they say. They believe and mostly feel that any other place outside of Akka, the home, they feel as strangers in it. The only place they belong to it's Akka. So what is غربة? The word comes from the Arabic word غرب, means west. غربت الشمس, sunset. The word تغرب from the same root means move to another place away from home. غربة not only indicates a geographical location, but also implies the emotional distance from home. But what if home is not the home we knew before? What if cities are not the cities we knew anymore? Then we are strangers in our own homeland, غرباء في وطننا, or strangers everywhere, غرباء في كل مكان. And these are the Palestinians since 1948. My father never left Akka. In addition to him swearing وحياة غربتي, he would say that he is like a fish. If you take him outside of Akka, the sea, he will die. His only way out was like this. In 2014, after a long battle with cancer, he passed away. Before his funeral, I asked the ambulance driver to take his coffin in the car and drive along the city of Akka through his favorite places. مقهى الفنار Cafe, nearby the Akka Light Tower, where he used to drink his coffee every morning. And then we passed through مخبز أبو فخري البشتاوي أبو فخري bakery, where he used to go every Saturday morning and buy مناقيش زعتر, where Abu Fakhri was wrapped it in the Ittihad newspaper, the old communist newspaper in Palestine. And then through the port of Akka, where his Abu Christo restaurant is, where he used to sit with his friends, eat fish and drink araq, and speak about the good old days. This was his goodbye to Akka, Akka's goodbye to him, and my goodbye to them both. As Akka for me is not the same city when he left. And cities are not the same without their people, whether they were forced displaced or died. Tonight, we're not going to speak about Akka, unfortunately, but about other important Palestinian Mediterranean deleted cities, Jaffa and Gaza. Cities that were ethnic cleansed. Their people were forced displaced and killed. Cities that were erased in 48 and nowadays. Cities located on the port where urbans, cosmopolitan, and embraced the beginning of the social and cultural civilization, but were deleted, and their people are refugees all around the world. Today we have 5 great speakers, in-house and online, to speak about the past, the present, but most importantly, how the future look like for Gaza and Jaffa. We will start with Robert Bartisios, Professor Heritage and Museum Studies, founder of CIA and co-founder of Heritage Lab Center, and Alia Younes, she is a filmmaker, writer, heritage scholar, and co-founder of Heritage Lab Center. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for this introduction. It brought us straight away to actually my role tonight is closer. Okay. Do we have to stand up? Yes? You can see, well, okay. Hello, I'm Robert. Thank you for the introduction. But also, thank you for the bridge to what I'm supposed to be speaking about. From all the great speakers, I'm due to give a very short introduction. And the reason they asked me to give this introduction that I work with three of these wonderful people that you will hear. Sarah, that's online, Umaya and Alia. And we worked for the last 10 odd years, even more, on the concept of a heritage lab. And a heritage lab, we're going to talk about heritage, is always seen as something in history. And I have to apologize, I was born before technology. I saw 3 screens, and I made a slideshow. I made a slideshow that actually catering for 3 screens. So I skipped to 3 slides because my introduction is a little bit to explain the concept of the Heritage Lab that we designed. I see another founder of the Heritage Lab sitting in the audience too. And to place actually the heritage not as much in the past, but in the present and the future. But to understand it is that most of you, I can't see you because of all the lights, but most of you will have that idea of heritage as something from the past, a thing, something beautiful. In those 3 slides that were combined together were actually to what I would call the reliable past. That everybody understands when they see these heritage objects, that is heritage. That is something we treasure and we keep for the future. But the concept of the heritage is something that we can also read in the concept of that global idea of universal values. So the world wonders. Then there's a slide with I can't even read from this distance, but to say that that concept of heritage is always linked to experts saying this is important heritage. You should put it on a list, and this is the way you should keep it for the future. And of course, it's the 3rd slide in this series. The most important concept is the UNESCO World Heritage List that we see as, and that they advocate also as that universal important value. But what if those values, and that's the 3rd series of 3, this is Roman Island, this is critical approaches, and this is Zanzibar, 2 sites that I will touch upon as kind of the founding ground of the Heritage Lab. What if those heritage are so dominated by the European concept of it? Heritage is a European concept. Most of the experts were, and still are Europeans or Western people that look at heritage in a different way than most of the local groups. So Robben Island, one of the places that we as CIE and Heritage Lab worked, is of course an important World Heritage Site. But to put it on a list, they had to give it values. And here you see the short description as it is on the UNESCO side. Now I skip to the Zanzibar. That's a little bit richer, but most of the time it is really focusing on buildings. It is really focusing on colonial relationships, often dictates whether a site is of universal value. So one of the first sites that I, as a maritime archaeologist, but a heritage scholar in development, learned from Robben Island when I was there, is that they really struggled with all those narratives that were put on them. They had a very important message in the 1990s when it became a World Heritage Site. That was anti-apartheid, anti-racism, and the Nelson Mandela story. But for the experts that were inspecting them as a World Heritage Site, they say, yeah, no, you have to diversify. And you see here the group of experts now almost 10 years ago, but this hasn't changed that much. You have to diversify. And when they saw me as one of their partners, they said, oh, you are such a white guy. Tell us what to do. And actually, I learned from them. And that was the first thing I learned from them. What is your definition of heritage? So we started to work with an open definition. We invited many people from Africa to come. And they started to actually plot what heritage meant for them. So that were the first, for me, seeds for that idea of putting a lab where you can experiment with the past, can experiment with the narratives. And they put a wonderful website together that actually put their island central as an island of isolation. And they tell more stories than just the Nelson Mandela story. And they felt like political prisoners. We still have to tell our story, but we should also create a place to diversify that story for the future. The second, and I try to speed up because this introduction should have been short. This was really the game changer for us. That was Zanzibar. When we came to work there, there was a group of women that saw their city being so popular in the international tourism that all their places were actually taken away by hotels. So Robben Island was to enrich their own narrative. Zanzibar was about losing space, what there were narratives about. So I can't point at it, but if you see that green on the right, that green spot, that doesn't exist anymore. That's the Hyatt. Those women fought to save that space because that was the only place where they could have public access to the beach, had their swimming classes, hanging out during the day. They lost, of course. They lost from the Hyatt. And then they did something that was, as I said, a game changer for us, was they said, but we still have our memory. We should start recording our memory so that we can safeguard our narratives. And if we look now at the topic of tonight, how is that relevant for our future? So, before I hand over to Alia, that concept of a heritage lab that we designed was basically based on that idea that you could save your heritage, not only physically, sometimes it's already lost, but to have a strong building and a platform to experiment with your narratives, to safeguard your narrative, and to present your narrative. Alia, who I hand over to, she was very, very important in the Heritage Lab because she's a filmmaker, apart from also a writer and a heritage scholar, and she brought the concept of video to that concept of our Heritage Lab. And I think your speciality will be about heritage landscapes and food and film. And I hand over to you. Yes.
Thank you, Robert.
Okay, very close. Okay. Yeah, I am going to talk a little bit about, following up on that, the idea of heritage as one of the first things the Israelis worked on destroying and replacing with another narrative physically and in erasing memory. Or making the memory unheard by others. And so I think that was a big part of it, and we're talking about Jaffa and Gaza today, and they're connected as both seaports and also as the place where you meet what is equally important to Palestine, which is the rural areas and the urban. So they meet in Jaffa and Gaza, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But first, I thank you all for being here, and I think I want to show you a little clip that was made in 1948. And every time I'm feeling weak, I find this woman gives me a lot of inspiration. So if we could play that clip. I can do it.
تخافوش من الله الله مش للجميع
تبع مين هذا
الله
اسمع علاش تتغوط هذا الارض تبعك
تبعي
تبعك
تبعي اولادي 15 نفر ذكوره وصبيان بنات واولاد وما لهم مش الا الله رزقتنا على هزتنا يعني لما تاخذوهن وتحطوا فيهن دول وين نروح احنا وين نعيش في دول نروح في قضيش منا هذا زيتوناتنا دارنا وهذا مستحيل حدا يخبط فيها خطر.
استنى
ما ندور ما ننهج بدنا نعيش احنا نخارة بدنا نعيش.
So it's sad that you see the same thing still today, but I think that the resilience is then and now is very admirable. The slides are coming in order that I'm just going to wing it a little bit. So what's coming up now is a slide that is the logo for a project I've been working on called Tree Routed. And it's a project that comes out of the Heritage Lab. And I had made a film about the olive tree. And then I started to become obsessed with the connection people have to trees and how that their heritage is linked to trees they feel very attached to. And we started mapping it around the world and to show how we're connected through our trees. And I think I have a slide of that. Maybe. Okay, get rid of the logo. Okay, so this is what the interface looks like, and it's still a work in progress, but highlighted up there are the Palestinian cities that are included in it. But in each one, you get a box that lets you know what the story is about, and then a little bit about who filmed it. So you get an idea who filmed the person, and then you can click on the video and actually watch the story. And I'm going to try to relate this back to Gaza before I show you a video from the West Bank. So when we think about Gaza a lot now, you know, we're seeing it as a seaport, a little bit, at least that's being recognized now. It was a very, very important trading route, just as Jaffa was, and many products coming from Africa and the Mediterranean. The European Mediterranean and the African Mediterranean came through Gaza, as well as the close proximity to Egypt. So there were all these, it was a very important trading spot that we often forget, and it was a major city. And one of the things that would come and go through Gaza was food and produce, not just olive oil, but part of the destruction of Gaza that's been happening for decades now is the destruction of the landscape and its trees. When we think about Gaza, we rarely imagine that this was a very, very rich agricultural land as well. And it was famous for its trees. It was especially famous for its pomegranate trees, almost none of which exist now. And so much so that if, you know, the Palestinian tatreez or embroidery, the symbol of Gaza was the pomegranate, or is the pomegranate, that would be woven into the work that women would embroider. So I think it's really important to also keep in mind that there is a rural and there is an urban, and we as Palestinians have actually been asked to divide ourselves that way. I come from a mother who was very, very urban from a Haifa, and a father who was very looked down upon by that family because he came from a rural area. But I think it's really important to see that the two are, it's impossible to not have the two exist. And just to give you an important story about, I always say I never eat more hummus than I do in Amsterdam, and for some reason I do. It's in all the restaurants here, and I like hummus. And 20 years ago, I did a magazine article on hummus, looking back at the roots of it, and I met with several food historians. And even hummus is believed to have probably started in Gaza because a lot of chickpeas were grown in that region, but also tahini, which probably originated in Syria, was being traded through Gaza. So these food historians believe that at some point someone said, "Let me smash the chickpeas and put some tahini in it and create something amazing." So we owe Gaza for hummus also. And when we look at Jaffa, I'm going to make sure where'd the clicker go? That I did. I think I'm going to not talk much longer, but I'm going to talk about the Jaffa orange. So you know that that's considered one of the most, or it is the most valued orange in the world. In Arabic, it's called the Shamuti orange. My grandmother was a Shamut, so she was from that family, so I'm very proud that we have this orange. And Omeya told me to tell a story about my one-armed great-grandmother. She lost her arm in a train in Haifa in the 1920s and lived kind of on her own after that. But when she would see my mother come home walking by on her way when my mother was a child, she would tell her to come upstairs, and one of the magical things she could do was peel fruit with one arm. Most notably, I'm sure it was the orange. So I wanted to use the orange as my segue to Omeya, but I forgot the most important thing I wanted to show you. Can we show the video? Let me go to the video. Is this Vivian? I'm going to show you, no, I'm not going to show. These are some people I filmed in Palestine. This is my father's village. This is Cesare in where would you call it? It's in Palestine. Oh, it's in Israel. I don't know. Yeah, and then this is us filming the olive trees, and you can see us going through a tunnel that separated this man from his olive trees. It's a crazy system of tunnels and blocks that separated him from his house. And this is us filming in Bethlehem. And this is a UNESCO. This is never mind. I won't go back to it. But the West Bank does have a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which is Batir. This is a fearless farmer I got to know. Come on, Vivian. Okay. I can't get to the film. Yes. Okay. So this is Vivian Sansour that I'm going to show you a film of. I'll speak about it after.
As a child, I grew up coming here as a Girl Scout. We used to walk from the church in the middle of the town all the way up here. There's also a water spring here. And it goes all the way to the monastery that makes wine. But what's very interesting about this place here is all that you can clearly see the difference between what the Israeli project has done. When I say the Israeli project, I mean the whole state of Israel and how they have expanded their settlements. This settlement here is called Gilo settlement, and Gilo settlement is all on Beit Jala land. This mountain is called Slayed. This settlement, if you can see, it's built horizontally. And the idea is to expand the settlement so much that it becomes part of what they call the Greater Jerusalem. But the most important thing here also is the fact that these are very ancient terraces here. And so you can see the biodiversity here. It's quite intense. We have here almonds, pomegranates, of course olives, carob, oak. And traditionally, like, people have discovered that when you have this biodiversity, when, like, for example, there's an oak tree in an olive field, it's healthier for the olive tree and it can fight off diseases that can otherwise attack an olive tree. But this biodiversity here is threatened, as you can see on the other side of this mountain. It's a completely different vegetation, all these non-native pine trees. And if you look very closely, you'll see that these pine trees serve different purposes. One purpose that Israel has planted them around these settlements is to hide evidence of the fact that there were people here before. If you look very closely, you'll see there are ancient terracing, old Palestinian house. So when you plant these pine trees, they take over and they cover any evidence that people, an agricultural civilization that was very sophisticated, was living there. But also because a lot of these settlers come from Europe or the United States and they want to recreate the world that they lived in. One other problem with these pine trees is that since they're non-native and since they're intrusive to this terrain, once you plant them there and they grow, the land becomes uncultivable. You cannot cultivate this land after a while. And according to Israeli law, we can go to prison, we can be fined if we cut down these trees. If you separate people from their land, you separate people from their groves, and for me, you separate them from their soul. And what do we have left? We are living in these enclosed concrete jungles now.
So I think she speaks very eloquently to something that is, when we talk about heritage and we talk about the future, you can't bring that land back to what it was. It's been destroyed environmentally. Not just when she says it looks European now, you can't bring back, the soil has been destroyed. It would be a massive amount of effort, and I hope one day we can make that effort to bring back the natural vegetation of that area and to let it grow in the systematic way that hundreds, probably thousands of years of farmers have been following to keep that land sustainable and to provide for the people in the cities and in the rural areas. So I'm going to end on that note and let us carry on to the Jaffa Orange and Jaffa. Thanks.
Thank you, Alia. Thank you, Alia. Thank you, Robert. I just want to mention that we're going to have Q&A in the end of our event, the last 15 minutes. Also, people who are watching us online, you also can participate in asking questions. Our next speaker is Sami Abu Shhadi. He's a historian specialized in Jaffa and former member of the Israeli parliament. Sami, مساء الخير.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this kind invitation to talk in this very important event. Thank you for caring about knowing more about Jaffa and Gaza and thinking about the future in this very dark times that we are suffering as Palestinians and as human beings in this very, very, very hard period in our history. And I also would like to thank Umayya Abu Hanna, my friend that has been working a lot about Jaffa in the last few years. In my few minutes, I would like to share with you some information about the city of Jaffa, the city that I grew in, starting with a comparison between my Jaffa and my grandfather's Jaffa. Now, I was very connected to Russia's talk at the beginning. My grandfather from my mother's side, Ismail Abu Shhadi, he was born in Jaffa in 1926. I was born in 1975 in Lod, the city nearby, but I had all of my childhood and most of my life being here in the city of Jaffa. But both of us experienced a totally different city. When I was walking with my grandfather through the streets of Jaffa, he was carrying in his mind a totally different city. A city that had different names of the streets, different names of the buildings, different names of families. Everything was different. While we were walking in the same street, looking on the same area, we were seeing two different things. For example, we would pass in an area nearby in Nuzha, and he would look on an empty land, and he would say, "This is Bayaret Barakat. This is Barakat family's orchard." But when I was growing in the city, there was no Barakat family, and there was no more orchard in that area. So this brought me to give few years of my life doing a lot of research, trying to understand why is the city he is carrying in his mind, my grandfather, is so different than what I know, what I see, from what I experience living in the same city. There were 50 years between us, and we were talking about two different worlds. This brought me to do a lot of research to try to understand this gap between my generation and his generation, between my Jaffa and his Jaffa. Now, I'm not talking about 2,000 years of difference. I'm not talking about a century. I'm talking about 50 years or less. And the change that this city has passed as a result of being occupied by the Zionist settler colonial project in Palestine was huge. And it changed everything. Let me quote two important people who wrote about the city of Jaffa, one in 1946 and one in 1959, to tell you what I am talking about. Jaffa, beginning with the second half of the 19th century, was developing very fast to be the most important Arab Palestinian city in modern history. By most important, I mean it was the biggest demographically. Now it's hard to imagine this, but Jaffa had a Arab Palestinian community more than El Khalil or Gaza, or at that time, of course, before the war of 1940. It was the biggest Arab Palestinian city demographically. It was the most important economic center. Alia talked about trees. The orange tree made us very famous at that time. Jaffa orange was one of the most famous brands in the whole world for something like a century, from the second half of the 19th century to the second half of the 20th century. Before this great project was destroyed also by the Zionist settler colonial project. The orange industry and agriculture made Jaffa a very important economic center. So Jaffa was the richest Arab Palestinian city before the war of 1948, and it was the most important Arab cultural center. This was my main issue in my PhD that I was trying to write in Tel Aviv University. Jaffa had 8 cinema houses in the 1940s. By the way, now we have 0. It had 5 hospitals. We also have 0 nowadays. It had a lot of, nearly all the important modern Palestinian press, جريدة فلسطين, الدفاع, الجامعة الإسلامية, a lot of others, a lot of printing places, a lot of sports clubs that today we have also 0 compared to what we had in 1940. It was a very active Palestinian cultural center, and I think it led the modernization process in Palestine, and it was very interactive at that time with main Palestinian, main Arab cultural centers like Beirut and Cairo. It was on the midway between Egypt in the south, Lebanon and Syria in the north. Most of the important cultural figures at that time, singers, musicians, poets that had their tours in the Arab world, they used to stop in Jaffa, going from south to north or from north to south. So they were giving a lot of lectures and shows also in the city of Jaffa. This led the last city planner who came from Cairo at that time. Cairo and Alexandria, 2 important professors in city planning at that time, came to help Jaffa's municipality to build their last master plan before the Israeli occupation. 1946, Ali al-Milaji Masoud, a very important Egyptian city planner, made the last master plan for the city of Jaffa. In his introduction, he published this very important project in a book, called it Jaffa Mashru' Takhtit al-Madinah, Jaffa, the project of planning the city. So in the introduction, 1946, Masoud tells us he is planning the real Arab capital of Palestine. Jerusalem is a very important religious center and a very important city, and it has its honor. But Jaffa, from his point of view, was the beating heart of Arab Palestine.
Sami,
Yeah.
for the time we left with you, I would like to ask you very two fast questions. We know that also Jaffa, after the Nakba of 48, is dealing with different reality. It's been eaten by the city of Tel Aviv. The Jaffans themselves, like also in living in a socio-economical hard situation. How you, as a historian, as a politician, as also a person who involved in the communities, how you work with the young generation to revive the city, to keep the heritage, and how you see the future of Jaffa in the upcoming years.
Thank you, Rasha. I was just going to do a comparison to explain the change exactly. According to your question, 1959, a very important Israeli journalist wrote a book about the history of Tel Aviv. Jaffa was totally crushed in 1948. 98% of its Arab Palestinian population were expelled. Big part of them were expelled to Gaza. So this is not their first expulsion now in Gaza. And everything changed, and everything was Jewidized. Right? They changed all the names of the streets, they changed all the names of all the important public sphere institutions, everything. So in 1959, this Natan Donevich, an important Israeli journalist, wrote a book, and in the last chapter he writes, remember Masoud that talks about Jaffa as the most important Arab Palestinian city. 1959, Donevich tells us Jaffa is a Bulgarian city. The signs in the streets were in the Bulgarian language. The language people heard in the public sphere was the Bulgarian language. So everything changed dramatically. Now, when I was starting my political and social activity in Jaffa, for your question, Russia, first of all, it took me a lot of time to understand what happened. Because the continuous attempt of the Zionist settler colonial project to delete our history, to bring us out from the history and geography of our homeland and of our cities is continuing till today. As a history teacher, I was not allowed to teach Palestinian history for my students. In an Arab Palestinian school, I had to teach modern Zionist history according to the racist Zionist narrative. So keeping our heritage and our identity and our feeling of belonging was done mainly by social and political activists outside the schools and outside the education system. And we were trying to do this through and working mainly with the youth. My last big project was this, I'm going to finish, was building the Jaffa youth movement in 2010. And to try to do tours through the city, keeping the stories of the old generation, the generation of my grandfather, gathering these stories, recording them in different videos and writing and registering their memories, and then building a tour according to the oral history that we learned from the old generation. And then by doing the historical research academically, I could also build my own story for the city and bringing this story to the new generation. That I have to say, the Palestinian narrative of the story of Jaffa, this very important Arab Palestinian city, gave feelings of pride and belonging to the new generation. And then they started loving more the city and feeling that they belong more to the city and the city belongs more to them. And then they also started, a lot of them, volunteering in different institutions to keep themselves in the city and building a future. Regarding your question about the future, Russia, we are trapped in a very, very complicated situation where the victims of the settler colonial project, we the Palestinians, who are living in our homeland, when we are thinking about the future, to build a better future for all, we must find a solution, not just for the Palestinian question, not just for the Palestinian suffering, not just for the Palestinian issue, but we have, if we want to build a future built on the values of justice and equality for all, we must give an answer for both questions, for the Jewish question and for the Palestinian question. So any political agenda we should carry in our minds should give a solution which is built on the values of justice and equality for all, for both groups, for the settler colonialists and for the victims of this Zionist project. Thank you, Rashid.
Thank you so much, Sami. Sami Abu Shhadi, we hope next time you are with us in Amsterdam and in better days.
Inshallah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Our next great speaker is Umayya Abu Hanna. Umayya is Palestinian author and cultural curator. Umayya Abu Hanna's work is future-oriented, equality-based, and curious about new readings in diverse heritage. تفضلي أمية.
Thank you. Shukran, Sami. I am also a dinosaur when it comes to... I'm not heritage, I'm antique. Let's see where we go here. So I'll tell you first why I was interested in Jaffa. I am 63 years old. I was born in Haifa. And when people say they are born in Haifa, they're lying. Well, they're Haifans. They're basically lying because Haifa was also ethnically cleansed. So my parents come from two different villages. I was born in Haifa. And then I kept wondering like who I am because I was born in 61, so 13 years after Palestine was erased. And I grew up in quite a Jewish city. And when I went to university, I couldn't say I'm Palestinian. It was a word you can't use, so you had to say you're Arab. And I have never been in an Arab world. I have never been in any Arab place. So it was very confusing for me. And then I was thinking, okay, I was angry at my parents. I had to go to therapy. I still go to therapy because I'm angry at my parents. How could they have done that? Like what? And I could feel their fear. You could feel that they were afraid. And then I was thinking, who are the people that I come from? And basically the women. I am not religious, but my roots are Christian. I'm of Christian heritage, so I can follow at least 2,000 years of roots, continuous roots in Palestine. So I started researching things, and I realized that Jaffa was our brains. It was Palestine's brain and heart. So what does it mean to have the brains? Jerusalem is a kind of theatrical place. It's like a theater stage where everybody projects angels and Jesus and Christ and Mary and Muhammad and Moses and whoever. It's very theatrical. And I went to a Catholic school and then to an Orthodox, Greek Orthodox high school. And my culture is Muslim. And I was too full of these stories, and I thought, but who am I if I'm not Moses, Jesus, Muhammad? So I realized that there is a big, big hidden secret. It was like a detective work with this Jaffa thing. And Jaffa, the more I was like doing this archaeological detective work, I was in shock, and basically in shock when I started seeing photographs. Because when people tell you stuff, yeah, you think, yes, they always, people remember the past in a better way than it was. Then you realize that Jaffa was the center of commerce. It was sandwiched between the orange groves and the sea. It had a lot of water, so the oranges were like, it was easy to grow all these oranges. Then you hear that babies, they used to put little bags of orange blossom near babies' noses because people were becoming very allergic to the smell of all this orange blossom. So it smelled of the sea, salty sea, and orange blossom. And although Jaffa's first identity has been like fishermen and boats and building boats, and then suddenly after the invention of this Shamuti new orange, it was very special because it had a very thick peel. You can peel without a knife. And it was very sweet. The thick peel means that you could ship it abroad and it was still good. It was like a very, very successful idea and invention. And so the new rich people who were inside the land with the orange groves were very different from the fishermen who were like kind of tough and, living by the sea. So you had these two, you could see some clashes if you read the history of, it's normal, the rich and the original fishermen. But then the marriage is excellent. You have the oranges. In the city of Jaffa, they had a little 60-centimeter wide train rail from the groves going through the city. It passed the mosque, it passed the cafe, it passed the nargila, and then it got to the sea. So you could get all the boxes of oranges to ship. And Jaffa had 120,000 people, inhabitants. And one of their little new neighborhoods, or like a suburb, was Tel Aviv. And Tel Aviv was small and a little suburb of Jaffa. Jaffa, when you had the money coming from the oranges, when you have money, what do you start having? You start having extra money for culture. When you have culture, they had, I think, 7 cinemas. They had theaters. They had all this culture also started more discussions of intellect. So Jaffa had, I'll show you the list soon, I think 9 daily papers in 48 and 5 magazines, weekly magazines, and a lot of intellectual thought. So you have now money from the business, you have intellect, and you have culture. And it became the brains and heart of Palestine. And because it is on the sea, it is more open-minded. It's more cosmopolitan. It has more interaction. Before the 1886, when the orange thing broke up, Jaffa was more of the gate, the entrance to Jerusalem for pilgrims, for business people. It was the entrance, but it became a destination with the richness. And because it became so rich very, very quickly, a lot of workers came from North Africa, from Yemen, from all over Palestine, Lebanon. It became, in I think 30 years, it started blooming so big that you will see that this very rich and quick change of demography was a little of a weak point when 48 happened. Because the social fabric was, there were so many new people, workers, and coming from outside, the resistance could have been stronger if it was more of like a stable thing. Now I'm going to speak about something that belongs to this. If you have a rich center of the whole land that is intellectual, that is business rich, and that is full of culture, this is the place you defend. And this place, Jaffa, had stories that I did not know about. One of them is about the 14 women who, we don't know if there were more, but we found 14. This is the founder. Her name is Muhiba Khorshid. She's a Jaffan woman, and her birthday is tomorrow. Tomorrow would be 99 years since Muhiba Khorshid was born, 99 years of resistance. Muhiba was a math teacher. She liked to play the violin. And in 1947, she saw a Palestinian child, a 6-year-old Palestinian child in his mother's lap being shot by a Zionist. And she got like really, her work before that was connecting different religions. She's of a Muslim background, and then she decided, fuck it, no, this is not right. She had a sister, so she had this idea of, okay, we have to carry arms. She had a sister, Nermeen, who was working as a secretary in Tel Aviv. And Nermeen came home one day, and she saw a usual route bus in Jaffa, and a Zionist gang came and shot the people on the bus. And so Nermeen stood in the street and said, what kind of world are we living in? And she got fired from her job as a secretary in Tel Aviv. So the sisters Mohiba told her sister, Yalla, shall we start this underground organization? And they called it Al-Uqhuwan, the first resistance. They called it Al-Uqhuwan, which means the daisies. And in 47, the daisies is like a very common flower, so anybody can be special. And it's white and it's clean. You know, you have, as a feminist woman, you also have to be like clean. So Mohiba and Nariman started this underground. This is Nariman, and Nariman was the person who was teaching the new women how to use arms. Now, if you start collecting material about these ladies, you see interviews where the question is always like, did people accept you? And then you skip. I had to really collect all the materials where they were like kind of proud, but we did this, we did that. So they have been in battle. And not only that, 3 weeks before Jaffa fell, in 1948, in March, the head of the resistance in Jaffa, a man, forbade them to fight. He said, no more fighting. And these two ladies who already had, they were 14 women and some men. Mohiba was making these strategies, and her sister was teaching how to use arms. They were getting arms and money from outside Palestine. And they met with the king of Jordan. They met with the head of the Palestinian resistance in Syria. And so they were taken seriously, and they had some newspaper. Oh, I have to show you this lady. This lady, Ms. Homsi, was responsible for intelligence. She owned a hotel called the Arabic Hotel. Can you show? Yeah, this is her business card, Victoria Homsi. As you can see from the surname, she has roots from Homs, from Syria. Palestine was full of surnames, especially Jaffa, Afghani, Homsi. So her hotel was on Station Street, 160. The phone number is 163. The keys are still with her grandson. And she was responsible for intelligence because she had the hotel, so she would listen to what the British occupiers and this. Here is Victoria and her son. She's the intelligence lady of the group. So when the head of the resistance said, you stop, Mohiba and Nariman sent a letter with copies to the head of the resistance, to two different heads of resistance. That's one of the Uqhuwan ladies with Jamal Abdel Nasser ladies later, saying, you know, we have been able to go through battle, and we have killed some people. And this guy has not done nearly anything, and now he wants to stop us from fighting, and they were allowed to continue. So what this story of these Daisy ladies tells us was that already in this urban, in Jaffa, there was feminist consciousness, women who knew that they can contact the head of the resistance. They can contact the king. They can ask for weapons. They themselves didn't have money. They were not from a rich family, neither of them. So there was this thing, but at the same time, in 1947-48, we still had these men who, during war, were still telling the women, you cannot fight, you know, you're doing too well, you know. Their egos were hurt, so their ego was more important than, that's Nariman. Nariman, in 48, when Jaffa fell, and Jaffa had 120,000 inhabitants, and 3,700 were left. So Nariman and Mohiba went first, I think, to Lebanon, and then they ended up in Cairo. And Nariman here is in Cairo learning to fly planes because she was coming back to free Jaffa. It didn't happen. They both died in Cairo. No, one is buried, no, both are buried in Cairo. If you show us the next. This is also, women were quite important, like active or important, they're always important, active in Jaffa. This is in 1936, when they were collecting money for donations for the big Great Revolution. The Great Revolution in 36 was against the British, and the British punished Jaffa very, very seriously. They destroyed the whole old city. This is a 6,000-year-old city. They destroyed the whole old city. So Jaffa has been going through resistance since the pharaohs. The pharaohs during the Bronze Age. The Jaffans had, we have archaeological knowledge of that. Then they have been going through a lot of resistance because it's a wanted, it's a port city, although the port wasn't very easy then. It's an entrance from Africa to the Middle East. It's from the Middle East to Europe. It's a very good city to conquer. And then we know that Napoleon was there, and Napoleon had a horrible massacre carried a horrible massacre in Jaffa. Then we have the British, and then the Zionists who totally expelled 97% of the Jaffans. Now, how can you have resistance? What do you need to have resistance? You can't have only arms. You need, can we have first the masquerade photo, please? You need money. You need money, and you need people in important places who would support you. So these are some Jaffans, as she believed. They have a masquerade party at the height of World War. And here their friend, Palestinian Jaffan Alfred Rock, invited his friends during the war to have a nice masquerade. He was a rich, this is Alfred Rock. He's a Palestinian Jaffan who had a big business selling a lot of citrus. He owned shipping companies, and he loved the good life. At the same time, this is him and his wife and his first daughter. He owned mansions, villas, land, and he was part of the city council, and he was part of the Palestinian resistance movement. Also a politician who was exiled to Anatolia. Oh, I forgot to tell you, when the British exiled the Palestinians for their big revolution, they exiled them to Seychelles. But Rock was in Geneva then, so he was not in the Seychelles, but he was forbidden to come to Palestine for 5 years. Then he came back, and he was investing all the time in the resistance. If you make your city flourish, if you love your groves, if you like culture, you love your city, then you defend it. So he was putting a lot of money in resistance. Can we go forward with Alfred? So this is part of his parties. This is another lovely lady. He was very famous for his soiree parties. One little thing about knowing about Palestine and, for example, our urban life. When people had to run away, the rich ones who left, they thought they're coming back in 2 weeks. The rest, everything was blown up, or they were looted. So now Israelis love to go to Jaffa because it's a great flea market. So you buy people's wedding photos, you buy their photos from the flea market for a few cents, and you put them on your wall, or their clothes, or their antiques, whatever. So this is Alfred Rock on the right, and with his political party. If you go on, I'll show you how most of our people spent their time. He was a Catholic, and he contributed to the Catholic Church. This is the Jaffa City Council, where you have, half of Jaffa was Muslim, half was Christian. And the Christians were Catholic or Greek Orthodox. Next, that's what his house looks like now. And this is him here in the front row in the first Palestinian, or the first or the fourth Congress. Yes, here you see them. He was so, sorry? Yes, Al-Husseini, yes. Next. So all their time was spent, next, Habibi. So now, we have the money, we have the ladies with the arms. What do you need to have a resistance? Media. So Palestine newspaper was one of, the founder of Palestine newspaper, Isa al-Isa. Isa is Jesus. His name was Jesus the Jesus. But Isa is a common name also among Muslims. Isa established this newspaper. His family was rich from selling olive oil, soap, and oil. Can we have the next one? And he was exiled twice. That's Isa and his first son, Raja. And this photo was taken by Amsterdamer photographer, Frank Scholten, who was supposed to go to prison because he was gay. There was something in the central station. So we have this photo because of the laws against gays. Thank you. So Scholten took 18,000 photos in Jaffa. He spent 2 years in Jaffa. 18,000 photos that I will show you. You can scan very soon. You can go to the archive. They're beautiful. And they're all copyright free. Okay. Back, a little bit back. So this is Isa. He got married at the age of 43 because he was all the time in exile or coming and going among congresses like Alfred Rock. I find all our intelligent men have been all the time abroad trying to survive and not die. And so again, this is by Scholten. And then it's in his home, Isa's home. And now after exile, this is the ground floor of his building. It is now a cafe and a bookstore in Jaffa. When Jaffa was ethnically cleansed, the new country, Israel, left basically one neighborhood, which is called Ajami. And Ajami was where the millionaires, the rich ones, lived. And they called it right away ghetto. The minute they arrived to this like mansion villa place, they called it ghetto. It wasn't a description, it was a plan. So they put all the people who were left in Jaffa in houses, and they put the new Bulgarians living with them. So you had to share the kitchen, toilet, bathroom with the new settlers who spoke Bulgarian mainly. So we have very, very few buildings that are still standing in Jaffa that are originally Palestinian, and nowadays you can buy them on Sotheby's Israel. I showed you Berg. They go for $3 million, $5 million, and they are advertised now as historic kind of Greek tradition. They look like Mediterranean Greek tradition, old historic buildings. Can I have the next one? So the media in Jaffa was huge. They had a radio station, they had daily papers, they had magazines, and that means they were like Jaffans were famous for being stubborn and open-minded. Usually people on the sea are like that, you know. I think Amsterdammers are a little bit like that. So now, if you like, you can scan, you can find Frank Scholten's photographs of Jaffa. There's a difference. Frank Scholten took photos between 1921 and 23. And Jaffa bloomed in the 30s and 40s. So if you look at Amsterdam 27 years ago, it's not like this. So Scholten is 27 years before Jaffa was like, but still, you can find beautiful, beautiful photos and a lot about queer photographs of Palestinians. Very, very nice, mainly men, queer men. So here you can also scan the story of the Uqhuwan ladies, of the underground women. It has a lot of beautiful details. Very, very nice. Nice story. And if we can go to the last one. This here, this is the Heritage Lab, and this is Jaffa with stories. You can click on 24 different stories. You have very, very nice stories of the rich, of the poor, of the funny, of the ridiculous, of oranges. There are wedding albums you can go through. There are family stories. There are the urban, the cinemas. They had a stadium. So if you want to know more about Jaffa, and the nice thing is that you can add your own stories. You can add your photographs, the stories, whatever you can find, and then I became in love with Jaffa. And through becoming in love with Jaffa, I realized that I had missed the thing that was destroyed on purpose: Palestinian urbanism. It was destroyed because it has everything. You know, farmers, you know what they do. It's beautiful, but the urban life is like the human-made part that has been intentionally destroyed. So now when you reconnect with Jaffa, you reconnect with the whole cultural history of Palestine. Now, what happened to many Jaffans, because they're on the sea, when they were pushed to the sea, many hopped on boats. North, they went to Akka and then Beirut or Lebanon. And the ones who went south, where did they go? To the other Mediterranean port city? Gaza. So now when you look at people in Gaza, you can look at, sometimes I look at their homes on, you can find all the Jaffan homes on Airbnb. Just check it out. Check Jaffa, Airbnb, or Jaffa, Sotheby's. And then you can look at these people in Gaza and you look at their faces and think, oh, is that your home? Is that where you come from? So now we move to New York to hear about Gaza.
Thank you, Umayya. Thank you so much. We're gonna move fast to Sarah Yahya. She's a researcher and interactive media artist. Sarah will present her work on Gaza and the Heritage Lab. تفضلي سارة. أهلا وسهلا.
أهلا فيكم. Can I have my slides, please? Yes, okay. So we're going to start with a Google Maps review of the Mediterranean Sea from the Gaza Strip. Here, Mahmoud from Gaza is giving the Mediterranean Sea a glowing 5-star review, attaching personal pictures of children enjoying their time. Why do people make Google Maps reviews? Google has created the world's largest mapping platform, using endless resources and imaging technologies to create a very particular representation of the world, one that intentionally perpetuates colonial depictions of space. And so maybe we can give some kind of capitalistic reasoning. It makes sense to take to Google and to praise your favorite establishments or to complain and hold them accountable. And so beyond maintaining an imperial cartography of the world, Google Maps assumes a pivotal role in fueling and incentivizing mass consumption, along with a lot of other horrible things. And we can talk about Google for ages, especially in the last 24 hours. However, with every hegemonic tool comes the potential for appropriation for different and more radical means. What is the significance of giving the Mediterranean Sea of Gaza and Jaffa a 5-star rating? Or to use Google Maps as a family album, like Mahmoud from the first slide, or a space of historical education, like we see on this slide? There's something more there. There's a human impulse to find ways to document, to amplify a voice and a narrative, even if it's by way of a mapping platform that has monopolized representing space globally. In October 2023, at the beginning of the current and relentless assault on the Gaza Strip, I took to Google Map reviews in an attempt to understand the geography of Gaza better and the everyday movements of the people that reside in it. I wanted to get to know the people of Gaza and really process the degree of destruction fully. Google Maps reviews, maybe before October, served as a testament to what it means to live within the confines of the Gaza Strip, a life that is maybe mundane and besieged, but reading this material now feels more like a privilege. Can we go to the next slide, please? Out of this act of browsing, collecting on Google Maps came an interactive workshop and installation titled Return to Sender, which was conceived as part of my graduate degree in human rights and the arts at Bard College. In this talk, I will briefly discuss Return to Sender, the exceptionalization of Gaza geographically and narratively, and the Mediterranean Sea as a means to escape that exceptionalization and recognize the connection that exists so clearly, of course, between Gaza and the rest of the occupied territories, with Jaffa as the leading example. The genocide in Gaza has been an extreme and striking representation of a decades-long siege of the coastal enclave and a 75-year-long Nakba. And what I find frustrating in the way that this genocide is covered is the lack of contextualization of life in Gaza before October 2023, one that is so clearly defined by a military blockade controlling all aspects of being. After downloading hundreds of Google Maps reviews from 10 Gazan reviewers, whom I describe as local guides because that's how they describe themselves on Google Maps, I decided to create maps that document the spots our guides chose to review. And you can see a couple, or one of them, I'm not sure, on the screen here. A key feature of all of these maps was how close and contained the spots that our guides hit were. And this could be a testament to the realities of the lack of freedom of movement in the besieged Gaza Strip. people were really staying within the radius of their camp or their area, which is maybe something that we also experience in our cities, but it was such a common trend across all reviewers. Can we go to the next slide, please? Many of these reviews are personal, tender, and intimate. Upon reading all of what our guides have written, I felt like I made a few friends and was receiving letters from them. This parallel experience of letters also presented me with another opportunity to demonstrate besieged reality of the Gaza Strip through return to sender. I was thinking of how every day we hear of the failure of aid trucks to enter the Gaza Strip because Gazans do not control their own border crossings. And this is something that has historically impacted postal service. Next slide. And the one after. Okay. All Palestinian mail goes through the Israeli Postal Service, not just in the Gaza Strip. And this is a picture from the Jericho post office after piles of mail finally made it after being held by the Israeli occupation for around 8 years. The Rafah post office, in the case of Gaza, has been described as eerily quiet, which is a striking contrast to the reality of Gaza as one of the most densely populated areas on the planet. People from Gaza are often barred from sending or receiving their letters, packages, government documents, medication, and more. And so thinking of these two representations of besieged life in Gaza in mind, the lack of freedom of movement and the lack of access to postal services, Return to Sender took the form of an interactive installation in the post office, in which audiences sort through years of undelivered mail coming out of the Gaza Strip, the mail being the reviews that we saw earlier on the screen, formatted from Google Maps reviews. The installation then invited audiences to visualize and plot reviews that they were reading on template maps similar to the ones I just saw. And I think on the next slide, you can see a clear image of the plotting process. So they were using markers and pins and threads and so on. At some point during the installation, I noticed a shift in how the audiences were addressing the guides. It seemed like they were beginning to grasp their character and forming a bond with them. Does Sundus just love every place she visits? Asked one attendee. Why is Mu'nis like this? Asked another as they laughed. And maybe we can go back to the reviews and read some of the what Sundus has written and what Mu'nis has written. Because I agreed. I felt like Sundus radiates this joyful energy and Mu'nis has a formal and strict and instructive tone. And I felt like I was getting to know them through this tone in their reviews. And it was great that this also resonated with the audience. Later, the person who commented about Mu'nis came to me and expressed that they were still thinking about the work. They were feeling uneasy, imagining whether these people were still alive and whether these places still existed. This was a thought process that I actually hoped participants would go through, particularly those farther from the Palestinian context than I am. And now, as I reflect on it, I hope that it is more productive than troubling. And in some instances, I felt like it was. But one fear that I had making this work about Gaza was to perpetuate the narrative of Gaza as a space of exception, one that is different from the rest of Palestine. This kind of narrative has long enabled the Israeli occupation to obscure their tactics of illegal annexation and displacement in the West Bank, which are actually largely inspired by how they have behaved historically in Gaza. These tactics are what scholar Tariq Baqouni describes as Gazification, quote, the confinement of Palestinians to urban enclaves entirely surrounded by Israel or Israeli-controlled territory. And so the same way the Gaza Strip is kind of pushed to the side and surrounded by Israeli settlements, the Israeli occupation is actively trying to create such spaces in the West Bank. In his piece for the Journal of Palestine Studies titled Gaza and the One-State Reality, Baqouni argues against Gaza's representation as a unique and extreme manifestation of the Israeli occupation. He states, quote, the Gaza Strip represents the very embodiment of Israeli settler colonialism in Palestine. And so in Google Maps reviews from the Gaza Strip, I realized that we can have one way to beat this narrative of Gaza as a space of exception. We can extract a key characteristic of a common Palestinian experience, a deep-rooted connection between the coastal peoples and the Mediterranean, between the people of Gaza and Jaffa and their beaches and the sea. If we go back to the maps I showed earlier, can we go to the slide from before? Besides the density of the points on the map, we notice another trend, and it's a bit self-explanatory. I mean, Gaza is a coastal city, so of course, everyone on Google Maps was frequenting the Mediterranean Sea and the locations around it. But a common thread in the sentiment that every Gazan reviewer had was their feeling of belonging to the sea, like the sea is theirs, which it is. And we saw that in Mahmoud's review of the Mediterranean Sea at the beginning of this presentation. And if you can go to the next slide, I would like to invite you to visit this map, documenting various reviews of the Mediterranean Sea and locations around it that I found on Google Maps. I need to acknowledge that it's still on Google Maps and I would much rather have it on another platform, but it's a work in progress. But when you enter the map, zoom in to see the pins as they're all near each other. And then once you click on a pin, you can scroll down and read the contents of the review. When you're done with a review, make sure to hit the back arrow in the search bar. And then check the other reviews. As one reads these reviews, sentiments of rest, rescue, attachment, escape, and leisure emerge. The same sentiments that are universal among Palestinians from the coastal areas. The Mediterranean shores of Gaza and Jaffa share more than just the same body of water. They both have similar histories of multicultural exchange and economic and cultural prosperity, which we have heard about in the previous presentations, only to be weaponized in very similar ways by the Zionist occupation. For Palestinians, the Mediterranean is simultaneously a space where the occupying entity exhibits some of its most colonial and violent actions, but also a space of resistance. And if we can go back to the previous slide, I think Umayya briefly showed this, but to mention it again, on our interactive platform, users can read about the pivotal role of the Mediterranean Sea and the Jaffa port in shaping the city's identity as the mother of strangers and the bride of the sea. Through the Mediterranean, Jaffa embraced many pilgrims and tourists to its shores. It was through the sea that Jaffa's key export and the most notable symbol of Jaffa, the Shalmuti orange, which we discussed briefly as well, gained global significance. The port enabled the export of this produce, and then the orange accounted for 1/3 of the port's income. The real original Jaffans were the fishermen, the sailors, the farmers who orchestrated the city's development into Palestine's bustling urban center by way of the Mediterranean. Next slide, please. In the 1936 Arab revolt against British expansionist policies, the shores of Jaffa played a major role, as port workers went on strike and began refusing Zionist cargo. Even if briefly, this caused a deep economic impact that was felt among Zionist traders and service providers. The Mediterranean of Jaffa and the shores of Jaffa, the beating heart of the city, eventually became a site of mass displacement. Refugees of the Nakba were pushed through the sea to eventually be received to the safer Mediterranean of Gaza, safer at the time. Next slide, please. The waters of the Gazan Mediterranean that bore the refugees of Jaffa from the Nakba have, of course, also been subject to this forced removal of people from their environments. Despite being a coastal enclave, people from Gaza have limited access to the sea. They require permits, and they are limited to an increasingly shrinking fishing zone of only a few kilometers, and it keeps getting smaller. I think right now it's maybe like 20 kilometers. In various instances, Israeli patrol boats have fired at Gazans who have exceeded these few kilometers. They have confiscated fisher nets and bombarded fishers' rooms in their multiple offensives on the strip. Next slide, please. Now, in a more blatant display of Mediterranean violence in Palestine, we are witnessing the establishment of a US-Israel port constructed with rubble drenched by the blood of the people of Gaza. However, I am of the deep belief that a settler colonial occupation regime is anything but natural, and so it's limited to collaborating with everything that is unnatural. And what is natural is the relationship of the people of Gaza, of Jaffa, of Haifa, of Beirut, of Alexandria, and the relationship to the water and the relationship to the sea, and that is what will eventually prevail. The sea, if not anything else, will keep a record of what it has witnessed. In Saja Sawafta's brilliant piece on her encounter with the Mediterranean Sea as a Palestinian from Jaffa, she writes of the interaction between the sea and the remains of the people of the Nakba, and you can find this piece on the Baffler. She writes, quote, "It is said that during high tide, the graves would further deteriorate. The skeletons were exposed to the elements, and descendants of the deceased feared that their loved ones would be consumed by the sea. The state, in turn, feared that those same remains would later wash onto the beach, skeletons resting on the sand in broad daylight, making it impossible for people to ignore the brutal extent of its violence against Palestinians in life and in death. That's just what Jaffa's sea does. It throws up things. It gives them back." End quote. The Sea of Jaffa is also that of Gaza, and the people of Gaza, despite anything that tries to stop them, will remain connected to the Mediterranean and its beaches, and we've seen various examples of that in the last 6 months. They will continue to fish, they will continue to swim, they will continue to claim the waters as their own, and hopefully we will continue to have the luxury of keeping a record of these beautiful encounters and maybe experience them ourselves. I would like to end this presentation with a following clip of Al Jazeera journalist Wael Dahdouh, who I'm sure most of us are probably very familiar with now. And it's a clip of him swimming in the Mediterranean with two of his sons, Hamza and Mahmoud, who are both now martyrs. Allah yarhamhum. Maybe we can play from minute 49, 33 seconds.
The video is not working, Sarah.
Should I send the link? We can also move on and then maybe share the link with everyone if that works.
Yes, please.
Whatever is easier. Okay. It's just a very beautiful yet painful video considering the circumstances now and knowing that Hamza and Mahmoud are of the thousands of martyrs of Gaza. And I wanted to end on the note that after we watch this video, may we return to witnessing such joy in our seas, in our orchards, in our deserts, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. We hope to have you next time with us in Amsterdam. We have only last 4 or 5 minutes before we end. Yeah, we're very limited. Maybe one question, two. How it goes there? Yeah, okay.
Just a little note that Sarah's roots are from Tantura. She's one more. We are all the beach girls. We come. She's from Tantura, another ethnically cleansed town.
Village, yeah.
And then you have Akka and Jaffa and Haifa.
Sliman, question. Another one, we can take 2. You can start with Sliman. Tfaddal.
Hello, it's Sliman from Jaffa. I've been to Zanzibar. I've been to Robben Island twice. And I would like to connect Jaffa and Gaza to Robben Island. Robben Island inspired me to resist colonialism. What was your experiences and what parallelism we can draw from Robben Island to Palestine?
Thank you, Sliman.
The same inspiration that you got from Robben Island and the direct confrontation with political prisoners that also find it very hard to make their way back to the mainland. So one of the things that I learned, and also in our group, we learned from working with the people from Robben Island, is that it is not just speaking about the past, but it is also how their heritage become future makers. And I think listening to this evening, it is like listening to all those stories, but it is also how do you safeguard those stories to become building blocks for your future. And that is one of the things that I saw very much alive on Robben Island, that they struggled with that and they tried to find a pathway into the future for their story. And I was so amazed, like I'm also amazed to see people like Sarah taking heritage as a future maker rather than as a thing from the past. And on Robben Island, they struggled and they find a pathway. I don't know that it was in all respects successful, but in when we were speaking in our group around Heritage Lab, it is about how do you create a platform that is dynamic, that focus on the future. And both the women from Zanzibar and the people from Robben Island were very inspirational for us.
Thank you, Robert. Last question, please. Yes, you're it. Yeah. Can you have the microphone? Just.
Yes. Very inspiring and very insightful also to hear these stories. I come originally from Lebanon, and actually I have a friend also who was telling me he's from Lebanon, that their family had a big shop from the family Fallaha who had selling fabric and for clothing. But I think also you were mentioning also the family. So there's these connections, but to what extent this is valuable knowledge also to learn what's happening in context of what's happening in Gaza now? To what extent this knowledge about Jaffa is being shared on other platforms? I mean, in educational programs, in schools, in teachings, in some areas, or what? Because it shouldn't be limited only to somebody going to a particular website. Is there any effort there? Because I think it's also kind of knowledge which is a pity to be lost or not communicated.
Thank you. Can you tell us your name, please?
Jad.
Jad. Sami.
Rasha, can I say something to Jad?
Please, yeah.
مرحبا Jad. Happy that you mentioned Fallaha's family's name. You can tell, first of all, you can tell your friends that the business that their family owned in Jaffa was maybe the most famous business for textiles, and they had the Ayad family also beside them. The places still exist on Jamal Pasha Street. This is something quite rare because most of the city was destroyed, and those, of course, ethnic cleanse. But their stores do still exist. They can watch them. There's a website named The First Boulevard. Jamal Pasha Street was planned as the first boulevard in Palestine. So they can see their places. There are photos there in this nice website, so that they can still see their businesses there. The last thing I want to say, that in this very, very hard and dark times, I think our most important mission is not to lose hope. The Palestinian resistance and sumud has been going for a century. This is not the first catastrophe we are passing in our modern history. It is the hardest, no doubt. But I totally believe that justice will prevail. We should just keep our hope and keep our struggle for justice and equality for all. And it will take time. This is not nothing is promising in the near future. But with keeping our hope, we can still think about a better future. Thank you, John.
Of course. Thank you, Sami. Yes, Alia, تفضلي.
Yeah, as somebody who is an educator, your question is very important. And it's not that the material doesn't exist, it's that it doesn't get into the classroom. So part of it is on us reaching out to teachers and saying this material is here and can you consider it? Because especially now, especially in higher education, especially in the United States, you're seeing a complete removal of Palestine from what little existed in the curriculums. It's now even harder to tell the story. So I think that it is grassroots movement, and it is the younger generations that need this education, that do rely on social media and platforms that people like Sarah are creating, that we've created in the Heritage Lab, that it's the institutions are kind of hopeless now when it comes to being able to speak about Palestine, but that grassroots movements that expose younger people to these stories is the responsibility of everybody. because it's not at the academic level, because that's kind of a very closed door at the moment. It's for teachers, especially at university level, it's really a struggle right now. So it's a really important question, but yeah.
Thank you, Alia. مي تفضلي.
Yeah, I think the question of the history and cultural heritage and heritage of Palestine and our biggest city, Jaffa, there are two things. There's a lot of work on disconnection, fragmentation. So you can have photographs here and there, and we also were struggling with copyrights. So when you're ethnically cleansed, other people own your photos, or there are big companies that own the photographs they took. We don't have land that we can't even use our own photographs. Then
the archive is stolen also.
The archives, yeah. One of the first places that Israel attacked in Gaza was the archives. So when you start telling stories, they say, do you have anything to prove it? So this connection also of stories, of people. So there's a lot of work on fragmentation. So gluing things together was like the biggest surprise for me. I had pictures, I had stories, but starting to see them as one story. And there is the other work on deleting. It's not only like where can you teach it. It's not that people are lazy or they don't have information. There's a very strong work of deletion. So I am sure, hello, whoever is working in the Mossad or CIA, they're everywhere. And then the minute you start speaking about, I was showering before coming here and being a little bit afraid. And I was thinking, what are you afraid of? Because you can so easily be smeared being anything. And the minute you say any truth and you connect it to another truth, when it becomes a bigger story of a people, you are scary. So this is a struggle. It's not only laziness, it's a struggle.
I think
Thank
also,
you, Maya.
if I can
Can we take last question? I'm ask the organizers. Can we take a last question? Yeah. Okay. One last question, please.
It's actually not a question, but a testimonial. What I find very striking is, sorry, is that okay? Anybody there? It's a testimonial. I happened to be in Israel 1977, and I visited Gaza City. I was in Jaffa, I was in Haifa, and all those beautiful places then. And what struck me in in Gaza City, which is just off the Mediterranean Sea, is that after 10 years, 1967, there was a lot of breaking down. Let's put it this way. I walked the streets, and everywhere I saw disease, things rotting away. The Palestinian people did not have a hammer and a nail and a brush and a paint to start fixing it up after 10 years of suppression. The amazing thing is that in the last half year, I find the Palestinian people as resilient as, maybe a diamond. I mean, I want to express my gratitude and my humbleness to these Palestinian people. I was so amazed to see Gaza City huge. So in about 45 years, the Gaza people erected this enormous place where people lived in peace. Maybe not completely in peace, but they build up something. And although this is happening again, this disaster, what you say, this is happening for the last 100 years, I do believe, and there is hope, that these Palestinian people, even the children who are seeing all this sadness and trouble, will continue, and they will erect, and they will survive, and they will live in happiness. Just like a tree, coming back to your initial thing, a tree of life.
Thank you, sir. we're gonna close now. We lost our cities, but we have our memories, we have our stories, we have our resilience. We have all these narratives to not only to remember ourselves who we were and who we are, but also to hold these stories and narratives in the face of the world that still doesn't treat the Palestinian kid valuable as any other kid in the world. We hold these stories and narratives for a future that can include us all in freedom, justice, and equality from the river to the sea. Thank you for all being here. Thank you for this evening. Thank you, Pakhaus Desweicher and the program Justice for Palestine. You can follow their schedule on their website. Also, this session is recorded and it's going to be streamed soon. Thank you, Umayya, Alia, Robert, Sami, and Sarah.
يعطيك العافية.
يعطيكم العافية.